biggest questions out on the West Coast, we waste no time. The first thing I want to know is, what is Oregon's offense in 2021? I'm not talking about the personnel or who's going to win this position battle, but overall, this team has a lot to be excited about. If you don't pay attention, if you live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and you don't really pay attention to Pac-12 football, this, to me, is one of the best chances of having one of those non-traditional powers crash the playoff party. But the thing about it is, we got to get some of these questions answered. Because if Oregon is just going to be a pretty good offense, one that's good enough to contend for and maybe even win the Pac-12, but then that's about it, well, that's nothing to write home about, because there's a growing gap between the phrase Pac-12 contender versus college football playoff contender. Well, the thing about it is, they're as loaded as I remember them being at any point, to be honest with you, at wide receiver. You could say the same at running back, at least over the last several years. And Anthony Brown is a multi-year experienced quarterback, and they've got good quarterback depth. So this sounds like a formula for a very explosive offense. That's what people are waiting on, Duck fans included. They're waiting to turn on an Oregon game and see the sum total equal to or even greater than the individual parts. If that happens, then Oregon's going to win the Pac-12. And if that happens, then this is going to be a team that could be a fringe noisemaker in the playoff discussion. But what we don't want is, we don't want to look at all this firepower on an Oregon preseason depth chart and then get out on the interstate and go 65 miles an hour. 65 is good enough. It'll eventually get you where you're going. But when we have a sports car, there's no excuse to be doing 65. Right lane or not, there's no excuse to only be 65 on the interstate out there. So we need to put it on the floor. We need to see if we can hit 90, 95. That would be a quantum leap forward for Oregon football. Let's go to USC. USC is listed, I think as of this moment, they are a co-favorite to win the Pac-12 South, are the USC Trojans. So my question with USC is, how am I supposed to feel about them? There's a movie, The Words, and Bradley Cooper, Zoe Saldana, they're out in an alley, and Bradley Cooper just drops the, "I'm not the man I thought I was" on her. And she looks at him and says, how is that supposed to make me feel? Well, I'm looking at USC, and I don't really know how to feel. I got a full Bradley Cooper complex about myself right now. I don't know how to feel about USC, because on one hand, I'm looking at odds makers tell me something. I'm looking at preview magazine culture tell me something. I'm looking at Heisman odds in a fringe manner tell me things. And then when you get closer on the ground in Southern California, if you listen to the fan base, they will tell you a different story. Southern Cal fans do not have a ton of confidence in the overall direction of the program right now. They are rooting for the program. It's not some toxic situation, where they are rooting for their own demise, but they're looking and they're saying, well, recruiting seems to have stalled a bit again by Southern Cal standards, specifically at certain positions. I'll leave it at that. And then also, the toughness of this team, when we watch the other big boys nationally, our talent roster may be comparable in some cases, but the overall level of play is not. Do we feel like we're trending on an upward trajectory? They don't all feel like that. And so I arrive back at my question of, how am I supposed to feel about USC? Am I supposed to believe the more national hype, or am I supposed to listen to the more legitimate on-the-ground concerns? Because right now, as I said, they're a co-favorite to win the Pac-12 South, which brings me to Utah, because USC is a co-favorite to win the Pac-12 South. You know who they're a co-favorite with? It ain't Utah. As of today, even given all the off-field questions, it was still Arizona State. They are plus 200, each of them, to win the Pac-12 South. Now, for the record, Utah is right behind them at plus 250. But Utah, my simple question about them is, why not Utah? Look at everything you have going for you. If you want to back Utah, which I very much am right now, as the leader in the Pac-12 South clubhouse, I've got the Kyle Whittingham reputation, been there forever at this point. Very dependable style of play on Kyle Whittingham teams. But they've got two very good quarterback options. Cam Rising is the guy who was already there. Of course, they've brought Charlie Brewer in. I don't know how many more times I can hear a stat line from a spring game. It is impressive if you go 15 for 15 against air in a pool with a Nerf ball. Having said that, two good options, much better than none, two good options there. But also, this is the deepest team Kyle Whittingham has had since he's been at Utah. He's been there a long time. Guys, they've had some really good teams. According to him and people around the program, this is the deepest they've been. And so what does that do? Well, obviously, it gives them a leg up in several facets, but here's what's key. Defensively, they were a step off last year, but they got, I think, 4 or 5 games in. That's going to be imperative. You're going to watch Utah this year, and I think you'll watch them defensively, and you'll say, and that coaching staff will end up telling you, boy, I'm glad we got those 5 games in last year. It may not have been anything to write home about necessarily, but the incremental steps that we needed this team to take, we ended up taking this year because of some of the lumps that we took last year. They got a bunch of guys back, really good pieces. I'm very excited about Utah. As of the moment, that's the team I would pick to win the Pac-12 South. Lastly, I want to go all the way up the Pacific Coast, all the way to Washington, and I want to talk about the Huskies. And I just want to ask, does Washington have enough juice offensively to do what they want to do? We've heard they may be favored in every game, certainly favored in 11 of 12, well, 10 of 12, certainly, and then maybe 11 of 12. But there have been some mixed results in camp up there so far. There's a lot of promise, but you look at their offensive line and they're massive. I mean, that certainly is a unit that you can go to battle with. You can rely on it to lean on teams. This will be an excellent team this year at playing with the lead. Is it realistic to expect to play with the lead the whole year? No, it's not really. And so then you start thinking about being able to trade points or being able to close a gap or come from behind on teams. Well, what you need is really good receiver play to do that. And that's the unit with Washington that has had some early inconsistency in camp. Long way to go in camp, but they've had some early inconsistency there. The other really fun thing to watch is, I was over on the Washington board earlier today, and there were some people that were talking about young Heward has come in, and he is not immediately thrust into the spotlight. He's not running with the ones quite yet. And so Sam Heward came in with a lot of acclaim and a lot of fanfare, and he's been there like 15 minutes. And no, he's not running with the ones. He's probably more their third option at the moment. That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all when a high-profile guy comes in and cannot crack the starting rotation. It doesn't always mean he's overrated. What it could mean is got a couple of good options ahead of him. And Dylan Morris is a plenty good enough option for them. Patrick O'Brien, saw and read some good things about him today. So Washington, there is reason to be excited there. Certainly there is. You look at the schedule, there's another reason to be excited. But the thing about it is they need a level of play that is not determined just on let's be 3 points better than the opposition every week. Because that's not how you make a great team, man. You got to operate to a standard up there. And if you're ever going to do what ultimately you want to do, which is win the Pac-12 North and go play for a conference title, you're going to have units like the receiver position take several steps forward. And you're going to have, obviously, a lot of other elements fall into place. But Washington, just overall, that's the biggest doubt, I think, nationally that people would have. They'll look at Jimmy Lake and they'll say, I don't doubt a second's worth of that guy's defensive prowess. But a guy in Jimmy Lake with a defensive background leading the program, I'll sit here and have the same questions about him I had about Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. A lot of people think that way. I don't blame them. I mean, Kirby Smart's a defensive guy. What are we questioning about Georgia still? So it's not the craziest concept in the world to see a defensive guy's offense lag a little bit to start their career. But Washington is in prime position right now to do some interesting things.